Thank you for those beautiful words.
Oh, Yofi, Baruch Hashem. We can see you, Rabbi.
Oh, okay. We can't see you yet, but we're halfway there.
Okay, as long as I can see you.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor, for the beautiful words. As a matter of fact, we are learning the third Mishnah of Pirkei Avos on Tignish Isocho, and you talked about 2 missions later. And I hope to conclude Mishnah Gimel today, so that next week we start Mishnah Dalet, and then your Mishnah Hey. All right. So here, again, for the umpteenth time, we'll repeat the Mishnah, and I hope I don't have too much prepared. I'll try to finish on time. And Tignish Isocho Kiblam B'Shimon Atzali. All right. And Tignish Isocho was the first member of the Sanhedrin who became the spokesman for the Jewish people, and he had, as you can see, a Greek name on Tignis, and he took over from Shimon Atzali. And this is what he used to say. What did he say? And we have dealt with this now for around a month. He said, Al tiyu kavadim hamshamshim tarav al manas l'kabel pros. Do not be like servants who serve a master in order to receive a reward. Be like those servants who serve a master not on condition to receive reward. And let the fear of heaven be upon you. And when you're learn that means that if you're going to learn how to serve Hashem, automatically, then your Yirat Shemayim will be a cement. It will bind you to Hashem. You will feel the fear of Hashem. Yirat Shemayim will become part of your makeup. You'll feel close to Hashem. All right. We have discussed this at length, and I'm trying not to repeat anything. All right. So let's just get into the point of it. I wanted to begin with a word from the Ger Rebbe. You know, Ger Hasidus in Poland embraced hundreds of thousands of people, huge crowds, unbelievable. Even today in Israel, Ger Hasidim, unbelievable group of people. So when the Imre Emes was a Ger Rebbe who succeeded his father, the Sfas Emes. Sfas Emes was the first Rebbe of the dynasty. When he succeeded his father, the older Hasidim came to him and they said to him, Rebbe, when your father was alive, the Sfas Emes, he promised us that if we would say a posik in davening with kavanah, with total kavanah, we would have all the brachos in the world. And what did he tell us to have in mind? Honor Hashem, honor Hashem, honor Hashem. If we said that bracha, honor Hashem with kavanah, total kavanah, intent, and so on, we would all, Mishalot Libeni, would be fulfilled the Torah. God will fulfill our needs. So the Rebbe turned around and said to them, he said, and they said, it hasn't happened, it hasn't worked. What should we tell you? We tried hard. We had all the kavanah we could. It didn't help. We don't feel we're different people. So the Imam turned around and he said, you know what he said? I think you're making a mistake. I think you think my father meant the posuk, Ona Hashem Hashiano. The posuk that says, Ona Hashem, please God, Hashiano, help us, be our salvation. You think he meant that posuk. No, he didn't mean that posuk. If he meant that process, maybe it would have been fulfilled, but maybe it wasn't the same idea. You know what my father meant? Another process we have in Hallel. Honor Hashem kani avdecha. We say, Honor Hashem, please Hashem, listen to us, kani avdecha. We are your servant, we are your slave. And you know, that's the master to look after the slave. We are your slave, and therefore, we're begging you, Hashem, to look after us, to see that we have whatever we need to be able to Hashem. And so the Rebbe said to Hasidim, and no doubt you haven't had that posuk in mind, because if you would prove to Hashem that you really believe in serving Hashem, you're servants of Hashem, it would have been fulfilled, because that was the posuk you meant. And Hashem Mashiach, anybody can say that. Please God, help us out. Who doesn't want that? It's a little more complicated. Oh Hashem, Ani Avdecha, I am your servant, and because of your servant, Hashem, please look after me. All right? And the Imam went on to add a few words to that. He said, this whole mission of Antiqueness really talks about an attitude toward life. All the nuances, Amanas, not Amanas, etc., all the things we talked about have to do, how do you approach life? How do you approach life? He says, we can be a wagon driver, we can be a dragon driver, or we can be enjoying a delicious meal. It's up to us to choose. We can be a wagon driver. A wagon driver drives a wagon. It's a very hard job. It's labor intensive, they would say today, and yet he gets paid well. And if you ask the wagon driver, why are you doing this? He'll answer you immediately, because I need to make a living. I need to make a living, and I need to work for a living. This is what I do for a living. He says, so if somebody would say to the wagon driver, you know what? Don't drive the wagon, we'll give you the money anyhow. He'd be excited. He'd be so happy. He'd be so happy because that's what he's trying to do. What? All right? That's he's only trying to make a living. On the other hand, if somebody is eating a meal, a delicious meal, and he's not getting paid for it. He's not getting paid for it, but someone says, why are you eating it? I'm eating it, I love it. I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. So how do we serve Hashem? Are we wagon drivers who simply are doing it because we want to get paid? Well, Antigua said, no, that's not the way to do it. On the other hand, are we going to be the person eating the meal? We get satisfaction. We get satisfaction out of doing with Sayyid Hashem. What greater satisfaction can a person have? He is fulfilling the will of Hashem. What better reward can a child have than bringing a smile to his mother's face? These are the ways that we get a satisfaction that's lasting, carries on and on. All right. So in a nutshell, this is what Antigua was trying to say to us. To move over to the words of, I mentioned them a few times, from the young Israel of the East Side, the well-known businessman who wrote his commentary on the Pirkei. He tells a story. Urban Bunam tells a story. He says a man, a nice Jewish man, won $100,000 in a lottery prize, and all of his relatives came to get their share. Everybody's a part of it, and everybody gives it. Everyone makes his request. This guy needs money to buy a house. Another one needs a dowry for a marriageable daughter. A third one wants to buy new clothing, and so on. And there's one relative who's quiet. He doesn't say a word. Finally, when everything gets quiet, the lottery winner turns to this quiet young man and says to him, and what would you like? Wouldn't you like it? Yes, he says, I only want one thing. I want to marry your daughter. I want to marry your daughter. In other words, everything will be fulfilled. There are some things that carry everything. And so when we say to Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom, Achash Yalti Meis Hashem, Oisu Avakish, what are we saying? We only ask one thing. Shift you, Beis Hashem, let me be close to you. Nothing could be more exciting, more meaningful, and more lasting. Shift you, Beis Hashem, one thing, and one thing includes everything. And the Gemara tells us a story in Tanis of Hanina ben Deisa. The American Hanina ben Deisa was very, very poor, had nothing to eat. And he was very, very frum, he was a wonderful man. His wife said to him, listen, Hanina, we must have a big dividends waiting for us in Olam Haba. But meanwhile, we're dying of salvation here. Why don't you pray to Hashem to give us something up front? Give us a little payment up front so we can live like mentioned here. He said, okay. That night he had a dream, and et cetera, et cetera. And when the dream was over, when he woke up in the morning, what did he find? He found a leg of a golden table. a golden leg of a golden table. She was very excited, very excited. That night they went to sleep, and he had a dream that they were in Gan Eden, and they saw all the tzaddikim sitting there with tables that have 3 golden legs. He and his wife have a table with 2. So in the morning he said to his wife, what do you think? She said, well, what should we do? She said, we don't want to be in a habit with a table for 2 and everyone has a table for 3. So he davened to Hashem again. He davened to Hashem, and guess what? Hashem took it back. Took it back. In other words, at the end of the day, Hashem hears what you want. Hashem knows what you want. Hashem knows what you need. But you have to be clear. Be clear to we say, mention a whole list of things we want. But the same thing, we want nothing to be diminished. We don't want to be missing anything. My friends, let me carry on. This is something we talked about before now. Antigonish had a Greek name, because after Alexander the Great visited Eretz Yisrael, Shimon HaTzadik promised him all Jewish children would be, after he died in the first year, would be called Alexander, and so it became a Hebrew name. And after that, they all became Hebrew names. So here we have Antigonish. Antigonish Tzadik is the head of the Sanhedrin. Imagine that, the head of the Sanhedrin, the smartest Jew around, the biggest Talmud Chacham around. Even though I mentioned the other day that this is the only time his name is mentioned in Chazal. This guy who was such a shining example that he was appointed head of the Sanhedrin only has one thing and one piece of Torah written in his name. This Mishnah here about how to serve Hashem. We thought that we're not going to deal with that again. Anyhow, etc. So he had 2 Talmidim. He had 2 Talmidim. And what were their names? Tzadik and Baisis. Tzadik and Baisis. 2 Greek names, right? Who publicly deserted Jewish tradition. Tzadik and Baisis, well, obviously you can see, came from Greek backgrounds, etc., etc. And when they heard the words of when they heard the words of Antigonish Yisroel, they didn't hear it right. They heard that their Rebbe is saying, for some strange reason, the Rebbe was saying, though he certainly wasn't saying, we had the quotation of what he said. They heard him say that, listen, don't expect a reward, because there is no reward. In other words, nobody gets rewarded for mitzvahs. As a matter of fact, there is no such thing as Olam Haba. And if there's no such thing as Olam Haba, there's no such thing as Yehenim either. There is no reward and there's no punishment. In other words, there is no accountability. So there's no accountability. What do you got to knock yourself out? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Live the physical life. Live the life of fun. Live it up. Oisim Chaim, they said, live it up. Because there's nothing else waiting for you. And so these 2 guys were so convinced that they were being misled that they actually started a culture. And 2 groups. Out of these 2 men came 2 separate groups, both you would call the most serious type of reform type Judaism you can imagine. And when the 2 groups, one was called Sadducees. What was the name of the 2 Talmidim? It's a Tzadik. Tzadik became Sadducees. Baisis became another group, Beitusim. And they believed in nothing. They believed in nothing. And the Sadducees and Tzaddukim were around for a very long time. Hundreds of years. They made inroads into the Jewish people. Some even became Kohanim Gedolim. And of course, these movements all appealed to the rich who wanted to be modern, to the rich who wanted a good life, to those who were not so involved. To them, this is what appealed to them. And so Tzadik and Baisis, because they misunderstood what their Rebbe said, and he never said that. His words speak for themselves. He never said there's no accountability. He said, don't serve Hashem al manas l'kavod pras, etc., etc. In other words, but after a couple of years, they disappeared. And what's his name? My good friend over here. Beryl Wine, the historian, the greatest historian of Torah Yiddishkeit, says as follows: we have a principle. We know the principle. The principle is that you can't undermine Judaism and expect to have a future. Any movement that came to take Jews away from Torah, any Jews that came to be a mechitza between Jews and Avinu Shemayim was doomed to fail. No matter what the movement was. And they themselves tried to create a reform Judaism long before the reform, but not as extreme. Believe it or not, not as extreme. What do you mean not as extreme? They even though they deviated, they said we don't believe in Torah and Hashemayim. We don't believe that in the oral law. In other words, we don't believe in Jewish tradition. We don't believe in Shulchan Aruch. We don't believe in the code of Jewish values and law. There's no halacha. At the same time, they said, but we do believe in the Torah Shebiksav. The Torah law we still believe comes from Hashem, comes from Shemayim. And if you ask a question, why did they do that? Why did they say they believe in Torah law? So the Mefarshim say, different people say the same thing, that in that society, in that period, they could never get away with it. They would have gotten killed. If they would have said they don't believe in Torah and Shemayim, including the Chumash, they would have gotten killed. Well, Reform Judaism came along later. You don't get killed, etc., but you can't exist. And so you see the dying embers of a movement that had big days and small days, and big numbers and smaller numbers. Today reaches a stage where it still has numbers, but most of them are not Jews. Most of them are not Jews according to Halakha. And they're on the way down. While Torah Yiddishkeit is growing and growing and growing. And so I have a boat to share with you on that, but I'm going to skip it now because we want to move ahead. All right. Samson Hirsch makes a point which I made before, and I just want to make it again in passing, that till now, till Antigonus, the people who came before that, first there was Moshe, then there was Yeshua, then there was the Kenim and the Nevi'im, Antigonus Agdola, then came Shimon HaTzadik, and after him came Antigonus Ish. All right. So all of those until now, until Antigonus Yisrael, they were, by all of them it says Mosar. Mosar they gave over. What did they give over? The whole Torah they had received, they gave it over. In other words, they were capable of giving over what they received, with the exception of Moshe. Since he received it from Hashem, he couldn't possibly give it all over. But the other ones gave everything over. Yeshua, Zekanim, Nevi'im, and they gave it all over. Now comes here. The word Mosar is used. Same word as Mosar. But guess what? Here, what does it say? Kibel. Antigonus didn't Mosar, Kibel. What does it mean? He couldn't get it all. The Antigonus had fallen. Nevuah had ended. The Jewish people were going into a spiritual decline. So he didn't have what everyone else had. So he couldn't possibly give it over. So guess what? And because he wasn't in a position to hand it all over, that's where the tragedy occurred. The tragedy occurred, he didn't realize that they were misreading him. He didn't realize they were misunderstanding him because he couldn't hand it all over. And if you wonder why didn't he realize it? He believed. And they all say this, and others, they said he believed that, yes, we're trying to get over a great amount of learning in less time, because the ability to receive is less. But at the same time, we regard that these students, these Talmidei Chachamim, are men of understanding, and if there's something they don't understand, they're going to ask, Rebbe, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean there's no reward? Do you mean there's no Adam Haba? What do you mean? And you would have straightened them out, of course. But they didn't ask. And he assumes they understood. Because if they didn't understand, they would have asked. All right? Okay. Now, some are less kind of that, and they say that these Talmidim, Tzaddik basis, they weren't necessarily what they appeared to be. They were guys who were heading out. They were guys who were going through a spiritual crisis. They were losing it. They were losing their faith in God. They were losing their standing. And so the minute they had something to grab on, something that sounded like a mistake, they grabbed it. They grabbed it, and through that came a tragedy, affected thousands of Jews for hundreds of years. That's a part of Jewish history. That's a terrible thing. And all of it came down. But you see, but at the same time, when Antigonus came along, what does it say? He didn't receive, because he was not, the previous generation didn't give him the authenticity, the validation that he's the leader. And from now on, there were students, clever students, great students, Talmud Chachamim, the greatest that there were, and from the group itself, they were appointed leadership. So Antigonus Yisrochel was the first, you see, who was not appointed by Shimon HaTzadik. In other words, he was appointed by his group of peers, among whom he shone. But at the same time, he represented a diminished period in history, which had challenges that he wasn't aware of himself. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of Rosh makes another thing. There's such a thing as avodim hamishamshin. Listen to their words: servants who serve the master. Now, if you're a servant to the king, and you work in the palace, the chances are you never see the king. There are hundreds like you, even thousands like you. You never meet the king. Even if you work in the White House, you're never going to meet the president, right? But then there's something called hamishamshin. The word that you use is like a shamus. A shamus is a lower grade worker, lower grade, but at the same time has personal contact. He works in the palace, and he receives. He becomes a friend of those in charge, and now a person like that. He's happy to work. He feels gratified. Look what he's doing. He knows the king. He talks to the king. He's close to Hashem, and so on. He doesn't want reward. And that's what Shimon said. That's what Antigonus said. If you're close to Hashem and you feel honored to be part of the palace, there's nothing else you want. There's nothing else you want. And so said Antigonus, that's the way we should be with Hashem. Hashem, every chance we have to serve him, we're in his presence. We're close to him. We're giving him honor. We're giving him kavod, and he's giving us bigger honor by allowing us to serve him. And then at the end he says, "V'yimor Shemayim Aleichem." The last words of the Mishnah, which we're not going to go into detail again. What does he say? If a person serves Hashem with those intentions, then it's a cement. Mor Shemayim is there automatically. You do your serve Hashem as you are, and all of them automatically. There's a cement called Yirat Shemayim, awe of God, connecting them to Hashem, lifting one up into another world and dimension altogether. That's called Mor Hashem. It comes automatically. It's a gift of Hashem for those who are Shamosim to Hashem. Shalom and Asla Kavod Pras. I have a wonderful lesson here from Rabbi Palm of Yeshiva Harav, but I think we're running out of time. What time is it on? All right. So I'm just going to mention brief. Rabbi Palm was a Yeshiva Harav. I mention this very often. He was a saintly man, a tzaddik, and his Talmidim loved him. He was American born, I think, but certainly American raised. And he himself was a student of Harav, spoke a perfect English, goes without saying. And he comments on this Mishnah. Now, what does he comment? He says, on the question, how could such a mistake have been made? How could Tzaddikim Baisis made such a mistake? And how could Antigonus Yisrochel allow for such a mistake to happen? Surely the Rebbe is careful. The Rebbe is aware that the tragedy can happen. You have to be careful what you say and how you do. So he goes on to say, he says, of course, he says, this only brings home one thing, he says. You know, in the olden days, a Rebbe spoke, a Rav spoke in shul. He spoke to the group of people. He spoke to the same group all the time. If he thinks he made a mistake, he might have misled them. The next time he speaks, he fixes it. He can change it. But the world we live in today, which is a world where you speak to hundreds and perhaps thousands of people and you never see them again. And if it's a tape recording, you never get back to them again. You have to be so careful. You have to be so careful because mistakes cannot be fixed, and they're not fixed. And he ends his article with a beautiful anecdote about Reb Shmuel Rozovsky. Reb Shmuel Rozovsky was the Rosh Yeshiva in the Polish Yeshiva in the days when Rabbi Kahana was still alive. That's in the 60s and the 70s. And our dear friend, the late Rabbi Aaron Pfeiffer, was a student of his for a while, and he carried around a letter from Rabbi Shmuel Rozovsky attesting to the fact that Rabbi Aaron was an Eli, which he truly was. And he never failed to talk about it and show it. Now, Rapam says Rabbi Rozovsky was a Goen, an Eli. He was one of the greatest Talmidei of his generation. And yet, he spent extra hours preparing a shiur. In other words, he said he took extra hours not only to think carefully of what to put into the shiur, but just as carefully what to leave out. Because he said, if I put something in that doesn't have to be there, automatically the student can hear something that takes them off in a different direction. If that happens, you can't control it. You say, you don't know what the damage is. Look at the Mishnah. Look what this damage was. And hence he says, all this is the responsibility of teachers who teach, of Rabbeim who speak, of spiritual leaders, of parents. Be careful what you say, because if you say the wrong thing, you're pushing a person in the wrong direction where you don't want him to go, and he doesn't want to go. But at the end of the day, these things happen. Right. I mentioned the other day, I got a new commentary to Pirkei Avos in the last few months of a young man who was a contemporary of mine in the Tanzer Yeshiva in the 1950s. He became very well known. He's a shining star. His name is Rav Reuben Feinstein. Reuben Feinstein is, of course, the youngest son of Rav Moshe Feinstein. And I had the privilege of having him as a classmate. He was a typical all-American boy and a great guy to know. So he wrote a beautiful thing over here. He says, okay. Let's see. Right. He discusses the things we already said, really. That Tzaddik and Baisis, they misunderstood their teacher, and they really thought he said that there's no Olam Haba, and hence they became Apikusim. He says at the same time, in Antiquities, knew the generations were in a downgrade, and he should have anticipated such a thing might happen, but he didn't, because he thought they would ask. And as a matter of fact, Reuven goes on to suggest that these guys, Tzaddik Baisis, probably had leftist rebellious inclinations and were heading out that way anyhow. They're on their way out, and all the Rebbe gave them was an excuse to latch on to. And all of a sudden they became leaders of movements that damage the Jewish people. And he quotes the Rambam here. The Rambam says, be careful with what you say to the masses. What you say to the masses, why? That there should not be found in your words any opening to raise doubt to bend the truth. There might be blasphemous individuals listening who will jump to interpret your teachings in accordance with their beliefs. These are the students already on the edge who will be lured to these false ideas and beliefs. They will be convinced you agree with them, and the result will be great Chil Hashem, as in fact happened. This is what happened to Tzaddik Baisis, etc., etc. They jumped at the chance to repeat their kfir and raise generations of kofrim. I have one more article here from Ramesh's, a good friend, Ramesh Stempel, the Rav of the Eidah Chareidus in Yerushalayim, who was a definite Eloi in the first order, and he talks about, he's on the same line Well, he has an original thing, right? He quotes the Rambam. The Rambam that the Barbanel attacked a few weeks ago. The Rambam say, he says, a person should always serve Hashem as a servant serves his master with love, not because he expects to receive any reward. And Tzaddik basis, they heard these words, interpret them in the wrong way, that there is no accounting at all, and therefore you can do whatever they want, and it became deniers of faith, kofru, etc. Right. And since they knew, he's uses these words, since they knew they could not possibly deny the written Torah without getting killed, they let that stay. They let that stay because the written Torah is harmless without a Torah Shabbat Peh, without a Shulchan Aruch. And then he quotes over here a well-known quip from the Brisker Rov. Very close to the house of Brisk. The Rav is very close to this day. All right. All right. So he says how this. Rav Chaim Brisker once came an old friend, a student that grew up with him in Brisk, and he had left the fold. I don't know to what extent, but he lost it. He wasn't from at all. And so Rav Chaim said to his student, his former student, his former friend, tell me, he says, why did you depart? Why did you go off like that? He said, Rebbe, I had big questions. And I'm ready to discuss your questions with you now. So Rav Chaim Brisker said, look, he says, if you had really questions, I'd be happy to talk to you. Questions deserve answers, and I'm sure I would have answers. But you don't have questions. You have rationale. You're justifying a way of life you wanted to join. In other words, you didn't have the questions first. The questions came later. So in other words, they're therefore rationalizations. They are terutzim. For terutzim, I have no terutzim. For kashis, I have terutzim. Those are the words of Reb Chaim Brisker. Those who justify a way of life any way that they fit to, don't engage them. Don't engage them. Questions have answers. Statements don't have answers. And so the Bais said we have now finished Mishnah Aleph, Pirkei Aleph, Mishnah Gimel, and Mitzvah Hashem next week we start the next Mishnah. Thank you so much for your attendance, and have a great Shabbos, and thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.